Welcome to the Mail Time Podcast. I'm joined today by Rabbi Yaakov Menken, the Executive Vice President of the Coalition of Jewish Values. You might have heard of them from either Rabbi Menken's very viral confrontation with Code Pink last week, or a few months ago, the Coalition for Jewish Values actually left the anti-Semitism task force that was housed at Heritage Foundation in the wake of Kevin Roberts' statement on Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes. And before that, the Coalition of Jewish Values has been doing a lot of work in the political space on behalf of Jewish values for the past how many years? At least 7, I saw.
We're over 8. We're going to turn 9 in February.
Okay. I was pretty close.
It's actually
the
beginning of Trump's first term, and we can talk about why that happened.
So, for those who are unfamiliar with the Coalition for Jewish Values, why did you guys open up shop?
So the reason why I would mention the beginning of Trump's first term, you may remember that many on the Jewish left were just in the business of accusing Trump of anti-Semitism, and those who worked for him of anti-Semitism. People like Sebastian Gorka, who is a world-class expert in not only radical Islamic terrorism, but the danger it poses to Jews in particular, and his love for Jews in particular. And these were the people, and of course, just Trump himself, but without even allowing him to set policy and see which way things were going, they had immediately prejudged him as anti-Semitic simply because he's conservative. And there was really no voice. If I'm thinking about, why at that exact moment, a group of rabbis who were seeing that there's no other organization, there's nothing that speaks up for really what is just the classical beliefs of the Orthodox community, what everybody is saying, but specifically what rabbis are saying. And why was it at that moment? I think it's that impetus, the fact that the Jewish left was busy accusing Trump of anti-Semitism groundlessly, which of course makes the fight against real anti-Semitism, like we see today, nothing but more difficult. And that's why we got started, and that's what we're about, is just articulating what traditional rabbis believe in American public policy.
It's important to note you mentioned left, and of course there's a lot of organizations out there that claim to be center or nonpartisan, but they really are of the left. The first that comes to mind is the Anti-Defamation League. If you recall, they actually basically diversified and started going after a whole alphabet soup worth of progressive causes and bringing that to the forefront. What's your relationship been like with other organizations, say the AJC, ADL, and other traditional organizations that have existed for close to 100 years?
Well, a lot of the mainstream would like to ignore us, but it was quite obvious at a meeting in Washington that we had gotten under Jonathan Greenblatt's skin at the ADL. You may be observing that since October 2023, there has been a real course correction at the ADL. They were doing it wrong. But on a lot of grounds, they are still doing it wrong. And so much as, for example, ADL in New York, New Jersey does an actually very good job combating anti-Semitism there, the ADL nationally, once Jonathan Greenblatt took over, Jonathan Greenblatt has no background in Jewish studies, no background in understanding anti-Semitism, a lot of background in left-wing causes and progressive development. And he was always very good with development fundraising. And so the fact that he was a progressive and served in the Obama administration, that seems to have, led the ADL to hire him after Abraham Ploxman retired. And the problem with that is, so in 2020, just as an example, here he was, Jonathan Greenblatt was shouting at X, at Elon Musk, how can you be putting that racist and who endangers Jews, Donald Trump, back on the platform? Because that was one of the key moves, of course, that Elon Musk made when he took over Twitter, was to remove that ban on Donald Trump. Do you know who was tweeting the entire time, calling for death to Jews and mayhem around the world? The Ayatollah of Iran. The Ayatollah of Iran was never suspended on X, never suspended on when it was called Twitter. And yet Jonathan Greenblatt is going to complain about Donald Trump? I mean, where does it even come from? And I'll give you another...
When you talk...
Go ahead, sorry.
Absolutely, yeah, go ahead.
Well,
no, I was going to say that Tucker Carlson also, when he had his issues at Fox, and they were very different and distinct from his issues that he has now, right? The thing with Tucker Carlson is he's evolved. He's gone from starting at the Weekly Standard to then being at CNN, MSNBC, Fox. There's many different chapters to Tucker Carlson's ideological development. The 2020-2021 Tucker Carlson was not promoting outright anti-Semitism, but Jonathan Greenblatt made it a priority of the ADL to actually try to get Tucker Carlson fired. They went after his advertisers. So it's, again, very interesting to see where the ADL has spoken up and when they have not.
When you were going to, when I was going to go, we were debating which one of us should continue. I was going to bring up
Yes.
Tucker Carlson. That's exactly the point. Tucker Carlson is a perfect example of the ADL having gone off course and fighting a battle that it really had no business being in. As much as Tucker Carlson at that point may have been a patrician anti-Semite, just like a little bit standoffish about Jews, he didn't talk about Jews or Israel on Fox. That's a lot better than platforming anti-Semites. And what he was saying about unfettered illegal immigration and the way that changes the census, because the census in the United States does not depend on citizenship. And therefore, if you want to get more Democratic districts in a Democratic state, bringing in a lot of illegal aliens is a great way to do it. And some on the left have been very open that is, in fact, what they were doing. And that's what Tucker Carlson was complaining about. That's not hateful, it's not white supremacist, and it's not anti-Semitic. Correct. And the ADL went after him, and somebody did Oppo research on Jonathan Greenblatt in particular, told me that one thing about him is that whatever you call him, whatever name you call him, he will embrace. He will become that thing. If you go back to when
you mean Tucker Carlson?
I apologize. I mean Tucker Carlson. Yeah. Yes, that once you called him an anti-Semite, he was going to be an anti-Semite. That openly, in a way that he certainly never was in his time at Fox. And I will, to go back to the time at Weekly Standard, there's video of Tucker Carlson in 1999 talking about Pat Buchanan, who had been basically pushed out of the Republican Party for his anti-Semitism. And Tucker Carlson in 1999 was describing exactly what's wrong with Tucker Carlson in 2025. So that evolution that happened, it's obvious that he got infected with a mind virus. So you're looking for causation. What made that happen? And I have to think that one of the things that made that happen is this research that was done was not about anti-Semitism or anything. It was just, who is this guy Carlson? What makes him tick? And the answer is, to get those clicks, he will lean in to whatever name he is called. Call him a white supremacist, he'll give you more content that makes people think he's a white supremacist. Call him an anti-Semite, that's where we are today.
So it's interesting, and there's two ways I really want to go with this conversation, but I first actually want to deal with the issue of establishing Jewish values and also unity, which almost leads into the Tucker Carlson conversation. When I speak out about fraudsters in the Jewish philanthropic space, or people that are misleading and putting out misinformation, a lot of times Jews will come to me and say, we need to be unified right now. How dare you say anything? How dare you talk about an organization that has good intentions but might not be doing the right thing? How dare you say anything? We need to shut up and be quiet and just accept it. And I get, like, at times I've gotten dozens of messages in a day calling me all sorts of names. I'm not putting myself in the same category as Tucker Carlson at all, but I understand that the innate, or the initial reaction from many in the Jewish community is to just attack disunity, even if it's not real, right? If someone were to say, I think we should teach the New Testament in a synagogue, that is fundamentally an anti-Jewish idea. I don't think you should do it. But when I call it out, people say that I'm anti this person, or I'm against unity. So how do you address the question of Jewish unity and unifying around Jewish values in the face of that kind of argumentation?
There's a famous parable from the Kotzker Rebbe that when God wanted to create the world, he had four competing voices. He had truth saying, wait a minute, people are going to lie. And he had peace saying, people are going to be fractured and discord and there's going to be warfare. But then he had acts of loving kindness saying, but people are going to do so much kindness in the world, and charity and charitable conduct and grace saying, but people are going to do all of those good things. So what do you do? And the Medrash famously says that God cast truth to the ground and created the world. He said, I'm going to ignore the fact that there's going to be a lot of lying in the world, but I will be able to create the world. But people said, wait a minute, okay, fine, 2-on-1, majority, whatever you want to say, but what about the fact that peace was now silenced? You're ignoring the voice of peace. And the Kotzker Rebbe commented, once truth is no longer in the picture, peace is easy to achieve. If you don't care what's true, if you don't care what's right and wrong, then okay, we're going to all have unity. But you know what? That unity is really the unity of there's this belief that there is no final answer. There's no right and answer. There's no right and wrong. Whatever thing you do and call that Judaism is Judaism. That's nowhere to be found in Jewish sources. That's just not what Judaism most definitely says. There's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And the effort to obfuscate that. And then you have the phenomenon of people who really have no background. There's something called an as a Jew on Twitter. On X. You may be familiar with this content.
Of course. As a Jew, I have to speak out against this.
As a Jew, I'm going to trot out my Jewish identity, the fact that I was born into the Jewish people, as if that grants me credibility with no Jewish knowledge and no Jewish training. We're called the people of the book, but I'm completely ignorant of that book, and I'm still going to tell you what Jewish values are. Sorry, that's not how it works. It's never been how it works. If the entire unanimous consensus of trained, observant rabbis, the guys who've really read through all the books that I have behind me, I like to joke because I don't study enough that I spent thousands of dollars on a Zoom backdrop. But the reality is that you have people out there who are really very learned, have been to all, and they tell us what it's no longer a matter of a personal opinion, a debate. If all of them come to the same conclusion and you're saying something else in the name of the Jews, sorry, you're wrong.
So how do you navigate that within the philanthropic space, and how you as an organization are able to find your voice? Because so much of the argumentation now, certainly after October 7th, is we need to be unified. We need to be unified at all costs. When, as we've discussed here, that unity is largely fraudulent and not really based on a sound foundation. So how do you navigate that? Because so much of the counter argument is simply about unity, and it's not actually about the issues. So how do you create a space where the issues actually matter?
Well, especially after October 7th, you can't have real unity that's going to be effective, that's going to accomplish anything, if you're falling into anti-Semitic narratives. The reality is that Palestine is a European colonialist name for the homeland of the Jews. It was consciously imposed by the Romans in order to dissociate the Jews from Judea. If you want to call that land Palestine, it's because you're an anti-Semite. Stop playing games. And you have entirely too many on the left. But we have to acknowledge the reality of the Palestinian people. I'm sorry, no, we don't. Go back before the 20th century, the only people called Palestinians were Jews. When the Palestinian Talmud was written, there were which was otherwise known as the Jerusalem Talmud, there were no Arabs to speak of in the land of Israel. Jews had continuous settlement there. There was a Israel, which is to say Palestinian, Gaonet. There were the 4 holy cities of Palestine during the European Middle Ages, when Jerusalem and Sfas and Tiberias and Hebron were all centers of Jewish studies. Go even into the modern age, and in the 1930s, Miss Palestine spoke Yiddish, the Palestinian soccer team played speaking Hebrew, and the Palestine Post, which is today's Jerusalem Post, was published by the Zionists in English. So the only people called Palestine, in fact, is so solidly true that in 1945, the New York Times published that the Palestinians are being boycotted by the Arab League. And in 1948, the New York Times published Arab League attacks Palestine. So this entire rewrite of history, which was done by Yasser Arafat with help from the KGB in 1964. We're going to redefine a Palestinian as an Arab who can't, by the way, they can't even pronounce Palestine in their native language. Let's be factual. Let's be real. Let's talk about what's really going on here. That is not, by the way, their flag is not the Palestinian flag. It's the flag of the genocidal Holy War Army, which was an Arab army that wanted to join the Arab League to slaughter the Jews. That flag became available for takeover after that group, that genocidal organization, was disbanded. And the PLO picked it up. Great. That's your flag? That's a flag of a tolerant, peace-organized group that wants to make peace with Israel. Come on. It's the flag of a genocidal army. And that map of Palestine, by the way, used everywhere by Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, to the square centimeter, the entire message of that map is no land belongs legitimately to Jews. Why do we not
Absolutely.
talk like that?
Listen, I agree that there has to be a focus on truth, 100%. I'm with you. For whatever reason, people are scared to do that. But, and it leads to my next topic I wanted to cover with you. You mentioned the word platforming. And for me, when it came to Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, or having any sort of illiterate historian like Daryl Cooper on, the issue is actually not the platforming. The issue is how you engage in that discussion. I actually think that it's important to fight some of these ideas because they have an audience, and I think that ignoring them doesn't typically work because they are existing in today's day and age, whether that's on Rumble or X, wherever it might be. I think that it is important to actually go into the cage with them and take apart these ideas because they're so factually illiterate. What's your take on that?
I would agree. When you can have a debate, you destroy them. I had a recent confrontation with Code Pink that we may have alluded to at the beginning, where, it was obvious that I ate her lunch, except that it wasn't kosher. It's that you have to have those discussions as long as you're willing to actually have a debate and have a discussion. When we talk about platforming, there's a difference between Tucker Carlson having an interview with Ted Cruz where he really challenges Ted Cruz and makes Cruz justify every one of his positions and back it up with facts and explain where he's coming from, as compared to his interview with Fuentes, where Fuentes has one racist and simply moronic, nonsensical, idiotic things, expressing admiration for Stalin and never focusing in on that. I think most people would agree that a guy who mass murdered approximately 30 million Russians, probably not a good role model. Nick Fuentes declared him to be his role model, and Tucker Carlson is like, oh, that's great. Good, let's go on to something else.
I also think you push back on Fuentes and whether he's making good faith argumentation, because if you were to ask Fuentes, and if I watch Fuentes to try to understand where what he's pushing, he's also a very talented orator, which is very dangerous because he's very good at maintaining an audience for 2 or 3 hours by himself, which is a real skill. You have to admit that the guy's skilled. And when you actually have these discussions with him, he conflates people like yourself with George Soros because you're Jewish, therefore You're all the same. And actually engaging Nick and making him have to distinguish between Rabbi Menken and George Soros would be very it would be very revealing, because it would force him to actually put his cards on the table, and that never happens in that conversation. In fact, once you actually follow the logic of what they're saying, it's basically the Israelis, aka people that worked in the George W. Bush White House, brought America into war. In Iraq, it destabilized politics in Syria, which then led to mass migration into Europe, which destroyed European politics, and then the open borders of America, sponsored by left-wing Jews, brought that problem to the American shore, which means that the Jews are responsible for foreign wars, the destabilization of Europe, the destabilization of America, and are not even concerned about America. They're only concerned about Israel. That is what they're pushing, and nobody can even they won't get on a camera. They won't get in a discussion with anybody who actually will ask them to dissect that. That's the problem. I would love to have a discussion with any of these people to actually get them to put it on the table.
You can't get them to take it apart. It happens to be, I mean, there's a paper that we're working on based on sources that are well over a century and a half old that outline what anti-Semitism looks like in a way that simply parses the Nazi-era anti-Semitism and that which we see around today, both from the left and the right. And it's about understanding the mindset of the anti-Semite. It's not what are the particular accusations. It's what is the ground level foundational idea that you are starting from that you would even have such a nonsensical accusation against Israel or the Jews. And the way that starts, for example, the anti-Semite classically believes that any Jewish property is suspect, likely acquired through fraud and deceit. So if you see a guy with no evidence accusing Israel or Jews or whatever of stealing one way or the other without a clear evidentiary basis where you couldn't make that accusation against anybody because you don't have the evidence to support it, that's an anti-Semite. And the belief that the Jews, and why it says, thou shalt not steal. How then could the Jews be stealing? Because the Jews, being the chosen people of the Bible, are chosen to be unfair to everybody else, take advantage of everybody else, to be hostile to everybody else. Now, obviously, what the Bible really says is Jews are supposed to be a light unto the nations, to show that, there's a moral way to do things and a biblical way to do things, and here's the way God told us to do it. That's great. Obviously, that's a very positive message for the rest of humanity, which the anti-Semite turns into a very negative, hostile attitude towards the rest of humanity. And they find whatever pretext they want to work from. Once you know those two things, you can sit down with Nick Fuentes and say, okay, do me a favor. You believe you're just criticizing Israel. You're just criticizing Israel policy. You're just
actually, Fuentes will say he's criticizing Jews.
I apologize. Bad example. Because you go straight out. Yeah, and by the way, you're completely right about, like, for example, me and George Soros. I'm sure you've heard the joke, the two Jews get you three opinions.
Correct, yeah.
Whereas, according to the Nick Fuentes version of the world, all the Jews are somehow on the same page, collaborating with each other.
You are working secretly with George Soros.
Side by side, me and by everything I just said about the ADL aside, Jonathan Greenblatt and I are actually conspiring together to destroy America. I mean, that's the kind of irrational thinking that describes, it describes based on that person who believes that the Jews are inherently hostile towards everybody else. And then you find the pretext. Then you find a way to say that is actually, I found evidence for it. Yeah, but you didn't find evidence that would hold up in any credible argument. Nobody could make the argument all black people agree with each other. All Hispanics agree with each other. All members of any nation around the world.
One second. The left tries to make that argument, right? The left tries to do that, which is why they go after African-American conservatives or claiming that you'd be against the black people if you were to vote for, say, Mitt Romney, or they do that.
It's different. They say there's only one legitimate black position. As Biden famously put it, if you say that, you ain't black. Which was a really racist and disgusting thing for Joe Biden to say, but never mind. And reality, of course, is that everybody appreciates there are blacks on both sides of every possible issue. What Fuentes is saying is that even if the Jews show the world a image of them being on opposite sides, in reality, they're all collaborating together behind the scenes. That's not what people say about black people. Sorry, they don't say about it anybody. It's a unique
Correct. That's true.
anti-Jewish
Correct.
hatred.
Correct. Um, I want to go to your involvement with that, the coalition against anti-Semitism. You were mostly, you being the coalition and all the different parties that were involved, were largely focused on left-leaning anti-Semitism, as I understand the intention of that group. Were you surprised by what emerged at Heritage Foundation in Kevin Roberts's video?
Well, the answer to the second half of the question is absolutely yes. Heritage departed from what Heritage Foundation stands for. And Heritage has now lost 3 members of its board and multiple key employees. Roberts is just by holding to these positions, not apologizing, not backing up.
Have you ever spoken to Kevin?
No, not personally, no. Maybe I met him, individual, like a handshake, but that's about it before all this happened. Let's go back to what the task force was formed. Yes, Heritage was largely behind assembling the group that would fight this anti-Semitism that is largely a left-wing construct. That doesn't mean that there aren't other forms of anti-Semitism. If you look back when the task force was created, which was in the wake of 2023, left-wing anti-Semitism was now evidencing it is a real force and a real problem, and what they called the Hamas support network. There is nobody protesting for Palestine in the United States is actually protesting for Palestinian Arabs or Palestinian lives. They are protesting on behalf of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. And how do you know that? Because none of them are actually cognizant of, they're not even aware that whereas in Israel, an Arab can work in any field, in any profession, get an advanced education, anything. In Lebanon, they're kept in particular refugee camps where they cannot get an advanced education or hold a white-collar job. None of them are aware of Jordan's confrontation with Arabs from Palestine in Black September. None of them are aware in Kuwait how Palestinians are treated. If it's not about Jews, they don't care. They exist to promote the narrative of Hamas. So, and that, of course, is being sold politically all over the United States. People are giving credibility to this so-called, they're human rights activists and they're pro-Palestine, when really what they are is anti-Semitic barbarians who hate Jews, and they found a new pretext. And that's what makes it dangerous. The Nick Fuentes of the world, as long as they're treated as kooky and extremist and not granted credibility, then they don't pose a danger. What Tucker Carlson did relatively recently is turned right-wing anti-Semitism from a bunch of kooky right-wing extremists who nobody respects into something credible and decent. And that is exactly where Heritage Foundation needed to draw the line. Say, if we're serious about anti-Semitism, yes, we set this up about the most cogent, coherent, organized campaign to promote anti-Semitism. That's what we were fighting. But now we have a real problem. We're not going to shy away from calling a spade when it appears on the right. But instead, they played a politics game. And that's a problem. The partners that they had.
But in retrospect, do you think that it should have been obvious? Because the Groyperism phenomenon isn't new, right? He's been doing this for a decade. He was attacking Ben Shapiro in 2018, 2019. He met with Trump in 2022, and people were pretty outraged about it. Like, in retrospect, should it have been seen?
Well, Nazis have been around since the Nazi era. But the point is that in the wake of the Holocaust, they are not respected by anybody decent. They were regarded as kooky extremists who were just like, there are people who always believed Hitler was right, we should finish the job, etc., etc. By the way, one of those was the Mufti of Jerusalem. One of those was the Arab League. So, which one was actually more dangerous? Which one was forming a genocidal army to slaughter another 6 million Jews? And that's the Arab League. The Arab League, way more dangerous. The guys marching in Charlottesville were racist. They were despicable. But nobody decent thought that they were acceptable. Meanwhile, there were a lot of people willing to downplay the anti-Semitic bigotry and violence of Antifa. So which one is actually posing a serious danger to us? The guys, the individuals, obviously, the Tree of Life was but by an individual, etc. But notice, the left was getting this totally wrong as it happened throughout the picture, because they were claiming, it's like, oh, those were Trump supporters. Trump said very clearly about Charlottesville, I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis. They should be condemned totally. And the Tree of Life shooter hated Trump specifically because he was friendly towards and surrounded by Jews. So that's not the way you fight anti-Semitism. You fight anti-Semitism by having this neutral yardstick and looking, where is the biggest danger? What do you need to be dealing with? There were always gripers. They were running around. They were in places like Gab, but they weren't really out there making it an acceptable narrative that the Jews deserve to be killed, which lies at the core of the whole free Palestine from the river to the sea, where deluded idiots who don't even know what the words mean are accusing Israel of genocide and baby killers, and obviously they all deserve to be killed for whatever evil they are actually not doing. That's the dangerous anti-Semitism. So now, because of Tucker Carlson and people like that, you got to look, and Candace Owens, who really, she was a decent and reasonable person.
She's off the
2018, 7 years ago, she was an advocate for the Jews. She went completely off the rails, went completely insane. Not the first time in history that happened.
I think she was right, but I think she was crazy even back then. I just think it was tolerated because she was saying a few decent things about Israel.
I don't know. I don't think you would find her saying the same. This level of insanity?
No,
for sure not.
Certainly not the same level, but I was never a fan.
But, okay. You go back to Tucker Carlson, Weekly Standard, again, in 1999, he's telling you everything that is wrong with him now. So that you see change happens in a very bad way. And here it's Tucker Carlson elevating Nick Fuentes and telling millions upon millions of Americans, take this guy seriously. That's a problem. That's when anti-Semitism moved in a direction that it should never have gone. And Kevin Roberts and Heritage totally failed to catch the moment.
Were you surprised after the meeting was leaked and there was a lot of hubbub about it? Only one of the speechwriters resigned, Ryan Newhouse. Were you surprised by Heritage's reaction?
Well, as much as you want to try to blame Ryan Newhouse, Kevin Roberts is in charge, and Kevin Roberts had a duty of reversing course. He confessed in that leaked meeting that they had openly violated their protocols, which lead to Heritage. Heritage has one voice policy. You're all supposed to speak unified, etc. And he totally violated that. He did not clear that this represents the consensus of Heritage before he went public. And what he said in that video, which, by the way, is still live on the internet, you cannot, even if he had a speechwriter, you can't blame anybody else for the fact that Kevin Roberts said it. Kevin Roberts said it to all of America on behalf of Heritage Foundation, and that Heritage Foundation still has that video up and live. That video says that we side with Tucker Carlson over the Jews. We do not understand, and nor do we care, why people are really criticizing Tucker Carlson. Anybody who criticizes Tucker Carlson is an evil person. We don't care if Tucker Carlson shoots 5 people next week and rapes his daughter. We will still side with Tucker Carlson more than a spouse will side with their spouse when they go insane. And we will never side with the Jews.
And even if we're not professional friends, he'll always be my personal friend.
Well,
to me, it was incredible.
But even the
Nobody said it
organization
after. Yeah,
will always stand with Tucker Carlson.
right.
I
No,
would
but I'm saying that was
certainly hope.
that
Are
was
you
the
not-
original.
I don't
that
mean
was
to
the
ask
original
a personal
video.
question, but are you married?
I think God married. Yes.
You think you're married? Is there something that you could do that's so insane and unreasonable that your wife would sue for divorce?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
I hope.
Of course.
God
No.
willing.
Of course. Yeah. Of course.
You know,
Yeah.
But, a person has to maintain a certain moral compass to maintain alliances with anybody. And here's Heritage saying, we don't care what Tucker Carlson says or does. We're his friend. And anybody who opposes him is a venomous coalition. And before he even got there, Kevin Roberts says in the first line, he says, it's axiomatic that a Christian should be able to criticize the state of Israel without being anti-Semitic. Wow. Congratulations. I have never seen a straw man better filled
correct,
with
yeah.
straw than that particular argument. That is the stupidity to end all stupidities. Because
Well, it was the first video, yeah.
This
But the
is the
second
first
video, he said the second he might not be a professional friend, but a personal friend he'll always be. Which to me is like,
I get that. But really, what Kevin was also saying is, I don't understand what the critics actually believe. I don't care what the critics actually believe. Because, look, as I pointed out, once you set aside an argument that rests on the foundational belief that all Jewish property is somehow suspect of being stolen, and that's because the Jews are unfair to everybody else, you now have eliminated everything that Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes, and Candace Owens have to say about Israel and the Jews. We're done. There's no argument you can make in there that doesn't go back to those foundational core lies about the Jews. Criticism of Israel, I could keep you on this podcast from now through Shabbos, and we'll talk about nothing but criticisms of Israeli government, all the things it's doing wrong, all the things it could have been doing better, blah, blah, blah. I can criticize it and last time I checked, nobody really accused me of being an anti-Semite.
I got accused once. Actually, yeah, I got accused for calling out a hoaxer, but yeah, I got accused.
I get accused of being a Nazi.
Yeah.
That I get.
Yeah.
Genocidal, baby killer, Nazi. If it's not,
No, actually,
I only get accused of those things
crazy.
on a day ending with Y.
Right.
Other than but when it comes down to criticisms of Israel, I'm sure that you and I both have an array.
I spend a lot of time on that. Yeah.
That in ways that anti-Semites will never go, because anti-Semites just have their foundational beliefs and everything else stems from that. And it's like an interesting academic study. Tucker Carlson, bunch of hummus eaters, which by the way is completely ahistorical. Hummus was invented way later. But hummus eaters in Jerusalem conspiring to kill Jesus. Who was he talking about?
What about
conspiracy.
What about the Heritage Foundation person who said, if you speak to the media about the issues at Heritage, you're a Judas?
Yes.
I was like,
okay.
I'm like, what?
One thing I couldn't stand about this whole fiasco was that after Kevin Roberts completely violated the one voice policy, when somebody tweeted out, I'm sorry to have to say this, but Nazis are bad. We actually had people writing to members of Congress saying, if these guys ever leave Heritage, don't hire them. We're not going to take reprisals on Kevin Roberts. We're going to take reprisals on that functionary down in the back office who dared to say Nazis are bad in a context where Kevin Roberts seemed to be confused about that. Like, where are we as an organization and a culture and a society if that's the problem we are having? But I will tell you this about the right and the left. Zoran Mamdani has way more Jewish friends than Kevin Roberts. Kevin Roberts is not himself a bad Jew-hating person who spreads anti-Semitism. He's a friend with a guy who is a bad person who spreads anti-Semitism, and he said, I'm going to keep my friendship with this bad anti-Semite. And for that, he now has effectively no Jewish friends. I know of more than one employee who has already left Heritage as a result. I know people who are looking at the exit door. We had 3 board members step down, huge friends of the Jewish community like Robert George, and now 2 more recently. Whereas Zoran Mamdani is surrounded by Jews who claim that he himself, despite being an actual Nazi, is the right guy, is a good guy. That is the difference between the Jewish left and the Jewish right in a nutshell. We were accused of partisanship for the last 8 years until Heritage. Now you can't accuse us of like it was very obvious the day after that happened that at no time along the way were we ever allowing political considerations to judge our opinion of what was an anti-Semite. When people demanded we condemn somebody like Thomas Massey, who was being a very quiet, nasty guy, he was not a priority. When they were telling us to condemn Paul Gosar, who's a huge friend and ally of the Jews. Well, of course we're not. We're going to maintain a moral compass that tells us, right now, and by the way, just to put it on the record, the very first thing that we said about Ilhan Omar after she was elected and went to Congress was positive. She requested that the ban on headgear in the House of Representatives be removed, and we said that's the right thing to ask for. We believe in that too. And it's because she got the ban on headgear removed that Randy Fine was able to be Speaker pro tempore when a bunch of Jewish kids were up in the galley being so excited that the Speaker of the House of Representatives is wearing a yarmulke.
Well, you mentioned Thomas Massey. What's your position on Thomas Massey now?
Well, he's gotten worse, hasn't he?
Well, I mean, look,
the fact that he's getting opposition.
I had Rabbi Shlomo Litvin on my podcast, and he emailed Thomas Massey to meet with him about the Aleph Institute and about petitioning on behalf of prison reform. And he said in a written email back to Rabbi Litvin that he doesn't meet with representatives of a foreign country.
Right. There you go. Which is very clearly very clearly anti-Semitic.
I don't really know. He accused the Chabad guy of being...
the Chabad guy, who's a Chabad of Kentucky, representative of a foreign government. Gee, I wonder what foreign government that is. And I wonder how often he accuses Japanese Americans of representing Japan. It was very obviously racist. But he wasn't saying such things publicly. He was very quiet. I don't know how recent, by the way, that email was, that response, because...
I think in the last 18 months, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Because I spoke to Litvin about this back a few years. And it wasn't that he was actually saying anything horrible. It was that he wasn't meeting with the Jewish community, was not taking what Jewish leaders had, was not taken into account. Really funny thing is, my first meeting with Thomas Massey before any of this was known to people was actually very positive. Massey is
fascinating.
He's a unique character. He's a computer engineer. He's brilliant. That's how he made his money. He has a house that is effectively entirely off the grid. It has solar power on the roof and a bunch of Tesla batteries in the basement. A Raspberry Pi, which is a little computer device that you may have never heard of, but is well known in the tech community, that is doing all the load balancing with graphs and charts and everything about the batteries to see that he's still got power to sustain the house. And he can go, even in a snowy season, for 3 days without outside power. 7 days in the summer. If all for some reason, the solar batteries, just on the batteries alone, he'd just be able to run the show, which is incredible. There's a guy. So I happen to have a tech background. I was actually classmates with Jeff Bezos in the computer science department back in the day. Yeah, we
Wow.
went a little different directions after we graduated. But you know, so I know tech and I can talk tech with him, and we had great conversations about that. We had great conversations about being pro-life. We had great conversations about gun control. And the fact that the Second Amendment caucus is something that he brought back to life. It had basically been disbanded, but he recognized that in Congress, for some reason, it's somehow a great thing to be able to talk about, that you're the chair of a caucus. And so he brought it back, and now, presto, he becomes the chair of that caucus. Then Lauren Boebert gets elected, and he gets Boebert to commit to doing all the work in exchange for being co-chair. So now he's co-chair of the Second Amendment caucus, doesn't have to do any work. That's brilliant thinking. I mean,
Brilliant.
It's like, see, here's the guy I have a decent personal relationship with. Try to talk to him about anti-Semitism and the stuff that's going on with the Jewish community and the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. You get a closed door. He is not a friend. That's the bottom line. He's willing to talk to you nicely about other things, but you try to get him on the Jewish community, and he's a problem. But he's not as bad a problem as Marjorie Taylor Greene has become. And even Marjorie Taylor Greene pales in comparison to Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. Partly because they have a squad.
Wait a sec. One second. I think that Marjorie Taylor Greene is far worse, only because Ilhan Omar, I think, is actually making a good faith argument that is wrong and is bigoted. I think she's making in a good faith attempt at promoting her very, very racist and despicable ideas. Marjorie Taylor Greene goes between good faith, bad faith, being more serious and less serious. For example, saying that like the stop AIPAC tracking thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's just Jewish groups. It's not AIPAC. It's RJC. It's other aligned groups. So it's very disingenuous. And the fact that she goes so seamlessly between having a legitimate policy discussion to all of a sudden just being off the rails, to me, is actually a bigger threat. Also because she's so closely aligned with President Trump, it brings, or was before everything just happened, but it actually it sullies positive association. That's why I think it's actually worse.
They both represent a problem. All of CARE is doing the misrepresentation of Jewish groups that you just described. CARE
Correct.
has said,
yes, but we know CARE is a bunch of whack jobs.
Have said from the podium that even the so-called nice Jewish groups are not our friends. We hate them all. We hate the Jews. We've just found a pretext for it. And when you look at what Omar and Tlaib say about the Jewish community and about Israel, it is actually entirely consistent and evil. I'm not a mind reader. I'm not telling you that with good faith or bad faith, or they're doing it for clicks.
No, they're honest.
Like Carlson. No, but I'm saying Marjorie Taylor Greene, I don't care what makes her say these evil statements. I care about how evil it is and how much damage it can do. Thanks to people like Omar, Tlaib, they made the squad legitimate. By the way, do you know that those two core identifying characteristics of anti-Semitic thinking, the Jews are stealing from everybody else and being unfair to everybody else, those are the only two things that AOC claimed to know about the Middle East when she was elected to Congress. When she won that stunning primary, first national interview, firing line, she said increasing occupation of Palestine, not letting Palestinians access their homes. Not only was that totally false, but it was clearly rooted in this hostile ideology of the Jews stealing from everybody else, occupying land, and not letting Palestinians, being unfair to everybody else. That's it. So you have a whole squad.
I think that the corrupting factor on the right is a lot more dangerous. The left, we already knew that the left is fundamentally against the Jews and against Israel. I don't think that we had any long-term prospects for the Democratic Party.
But the squad made it endemic. You're right. The Republicans are now having a war.
But I think it would have happened. The fact now that you have
there
Megyn Kelly,
no
Tucker Carlson,
right? There was a hostile takeover without a battle, without a fight. You had You had Jews in Congress paying more attention to the fact that they were Jewish and staring at their shoes, even on one occasion where they miraculously came forward to condemn the anti-Semitism coming out of Omar. They voted against censoring her. They voted for these meaningless resolutions that call Islamophobia an equal threat. All of this nonsense that made anti-Semitism endemic, at least on the right, we're having a fight about it. And there's a lot of organizations lining up. It's not just the Jews, obviously. There's a lot of people saying where heritage has gone is unacceptable. It betrays what William Buckley had in mind with the new conservatism when he shoved the Nazis out of the party back in the 1960s. We are in a state now where the Nazis have tried to come back in, and there's an awful lot of people on the right who are pushing back. So at least there's a battle about it. Do I think that Carlson and Green, are they dangerous? Yes. But there's so many different voices in the conservative movement that are willing to call them out. Ted Cruz, for example, who said, absolutely, these people are not conservatives and we don't want them. What, by the way, it's so stupid for the American conservative movement to accept these very anti-conservative, anti-American people in the party. Nothing says you're pro-American better than buying a house in a totalitarian Islamic dictatorship like Qatar, right, Tucker? I mean, my goodness. So
I've actually been to Qatar, and it's crazy that he would even say that. No one would want to live there like that. It's not even a legitimate
Well,
thing.
if you got enough money, you can buy a really nice looking apartment in a really nice looking place. But meanwhile, the whole place it survives on slave labor and the fact that 2/3 of the people who live there are not citizens. They don't grant citizenship privileges to anybody who isn't part of the privileged class. Oh.
It's actual apartheid.
It's actual apartheid, actual racism. That is the entirety of Qatar, and we're coddling up to it because you have to deal with that in that portion of the world, unless you're talking to Israel. In which case, it's exactly the opposite. They can do everything right. You'll still accuse them of doing it wrong. But I mean, get back to Tucker Carlson. Here's a guy who is everything that the conservative movement does not stand for. And if you repudiate it, if you go the direction of Ted Cruz, and you say, we are not with you on your Jew hatred. Okay. So you've got one party that says, when it comes to hating Jews, we're not with you. But when it comes to all the moral policies and values you stand for, that's our position. And you have another party that says, when it comes to all your values and morality, we are against you, but we hate Jews too. Who do you think the white supremacist is really going to vote for? When he has to go in, when he goes in the ballot box, is he really going to pull the lever for Ilhan Omar? I don't think so.
No. Rabbi Menken, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to know you better, for the audience to get to know you, and I really hope that you come back again very soon so we can continue this conversation on very important issues.
Thank you so much. It's been fantastic.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.